The rain was coming down in torrents, turning the Boston streets into rivers of black asphalt that reflected the neon lights like broken glass. My windshield wipers were fighting a losing battle, and I could barely see 3 feet ahead of my beat-up Honda Civic. I should have been home hours ago, but the late shift at Moretti's restaurant had run long again, and I needed every single tip I could get. The envelope with Mom's latest medical bills was burning a hole in my purse, and the numbers on those papers kept me awake more nights than I cared to count. I was thinking about how I was going to make rent this month when the world exploded in front of me. A sleek black car, something expensive that I couldn't identify in the chaos, came careening around the corner, spinning wildly on the wet asphalt. Time seemed to slow as I watched it flip, once, twice, before slamming into the concrete barrier with a sound like thunder. The impact was so violent that I felt it in my chest, and then came the orange glow that made my blood freeze. Fire. The car was upside down, and flames were already licking at the undercarriage, growing stronger with each second. I slammed on my brakes, my heart hammering against my ribs as I pulled over to the side of the road. The rational part of my brain was screaming at me to call 911 and wait for the professionals. But there was something else, something deeper, that wouldn't let me just sit there and watch. My father's face flashed before my eyes, the way he'd looked that night when our car had skidded off the mountain road, the way he'd called my name as the vehicle filled with smoke, the way I'd been too small and too scared to do anything but scream. 3 cars had driven past that night before someone finally stopped, and by then it had been too late. I wasn't going to be another person who drove past. The rain hit me like a slap as I threw open my car door and ran toward the wreckage. The heat from the growing flames made the air shimmer, and the smell of gasoline and burning metal filled my nostrils. I could see someone inside, a man, slumped over the steering wheel, blood trickling down his forehead. He wasn't moving. "Hey!" I shouted, dropping to my knees beside the driver's side window. The glass was spider-webbed but intact, and I could see him more clearly now. He was unconscious, but his chest was rising and falling. Dark hair, strong jawline, expensive suit that was now torn and stained with blood. "Can you hear me?" The flames were spreading faster now, creeping toward the passenger compartment with hungry orange tongues. I looked around desperately for something to break the glass with, and my eyes landed on a chunk of concrete that had broken off from the barrier during impact. It was heavy, awkward to grip in the rain, but it would have to do. I hefted it above my head and brought it down on the window as hard as I could. The glass held for a moment, then shattered inward with a sound like breaking ice. I used my jacket to brush away the worst of the shards, cutting my hands in the process, but I barely felt the sting. The man was bigger than I'd expected, all broad shoulders and solid muscle, but adrenaline gave me strength I didn't know I had. I reached through the broken window and managed to get my arms under his shoulders, pulling him toward me inch by inch. His head lolled against my shoulder, and I caught the scent of expensive cologne mixed with blood and rain. "Come on," I whispered, struggling with his weight. "Come on, we need to get out of here, behind us." The flames had found something particularly flammable, and the fire roared higher with a sound like a dragon's breath. I could feel the heat on my back now, singeing the air around us. With one final burst of effort, I managed to drag him clear of the wreckage just as the gas tank exploded. The force of the blast knocked us both to the ground, and I threw myself on top of him instinctively, shielding his unconscious form from the debris that rained down around us. When the world stopped shaking, I pushed myself up on my elbows and looked down at him. Even unconscious, even covered in blood and rain, he was the most beautiful man I'd ever seen. His features were sharp and aristocratic, with high cheekbones and a mouth that somehow managed to look both cruel and gentle at the same time. There was something about him that spoke of power, of danger, of a world far removed from my own small existence. I pressed my fingers to his neck, checking for a pulse, and relief flooded through me when I felt the strong, steady beat beneath my fingertips. That's when his eyes opened. They were the color of dark amber, flecked with gold, and when they focused on my face, I felt like he was seeing straight through to my soul. For a moment, neither of us moved. The rain continued to fall around us, and the burning car crackled and hissed in the background, but all of that seemed very far away. "You're hurt," I said softly, noting the cut on his forehead and the way he was holding his left arm. "We need to get you to a hospital." He studied my face for a long moment, taking in my soaked hair, my torn jacket, the cuts on my hands from the broken glass. When he spoke, his voice was deep and rough, with just the hint of an accent that made my stomach flutter in a way I didn't understand. "You pulled me out." It wasn't a question, but I nodded anyway. The car was on fire. You were unconscious. I couldn't just leave you there. Something shifted in his expression, something intense and unreadable. He sat up slowly, wincing as the movement pulled at what were probably bruised ribs, and looked at the burning wreckage behind us. When he turned back to me, there was a new weight in his gaze. "What's your name?" he asked. "Maya," I said without thinking. "Maya Thompson." He repeated it slowly, like he was committing it to memory. And the way my name sounded in his voice made something warm uncurl in my chest despite the cold rain. "Maya Thompson," he said again. "And then, you just became my responsibility." The words sent a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with the weather. There was something final about the way he said it, something that sounded less like gratitude and more like a promise, or maybe a threat. In the distance, I could hear sirens approaching, but they seemed to belong to another world entirely. All I could focus on was the man in front of me, the way he was looking at me like I was something precious and dangerous all at once. I should have gotten back in my car and driven away. I should have given my statement to the police and forgotten this ever happened. I should have known that saving a man like him would change everything. But I stayed. The ambulance arrived first, followed quickly by what seemed like half the Boston Police Department in a fire truck that was. Probably unnecessary given that the car was now mostly ash and twisted metal. The EMTs immediately descended on us both, checking us over with professional efficiency despite our protests that we were fine. Well, I was protesting. He was simply watching everything with those intense amber eyes, occasionally answering their questions in that deep voice that seemed to resonate in my chest. When they insisted on taking him to the hospital for a more thorough examination, he didn't argue, but I noticed the way his gaze kept finding me even as they loaded him onto a stretcher. "Ma'am, you should probably get checked out too," one of the younger EMTs told me, noting the cuts on my hands and the way I was favoring my right shoulder. "You might have some injuries you're not aware of yet." I was about to decline. I couldn't afford a hospital bill right now when a new voice cut through the chaos. "Sure, ride with him." I turned to see who had spoken and found myself looking at a man who couldn't have been more different from the one I'd pulled from the wreckage. Where the injured man was all sharp angles and aristocratic features, this one was broader, rougher around the edges, with the kind of face that had seen too many fights. He was wearing a suit as well, but his was rumpled and practical rather than elegant. "I'm sorry, who are you?" The imp asked, clearly confused. The broad man reached into his jacket and pulled out a badge that I couldn't read from my position. Whatever it said, it had an immediate effect on the EMT, who nodded quickly and gestured for me to follow them to the ambulance. "Wait," I said, suddenly feeling like events were spiraling out of my control. "I don't even know who you are. I can drive myself to the hospital." The broad man looked at me then, and I saw something that might have been pity in his eyes. "No, Miss Thompson," he said gently. "You can't." The way he said my name like he already knew exactly who I was sent a chill down my spine. But before I could ask how he knew it, he had turned away and was speaking in rapid Italian to another man who had appeared seemingly out of nowhere. "Please, miss," the EMT said, touching my elbow gently. "We really should get you looked at, and it would be easier if you came with us." I looked back at the wreckage, at the scorch marks on the asphalt, at the growing crowd of police officers and firefighters. Something about the scene felt wrong, too orchestrated. Like everyone knew something I didn't. When I climbed into the back of the ambulance, the injured man was watching me again. "Thank you," he said quietly, just loud enough for me to hear over the sound of the closing doors. "Anyone would have done the same thing," I replied, settling into the small seat beside his stretcher. His mouth curved into what might have been a smile, though there was no humor in it. "No," he said. "They wouldn't have." The ride to the hospital passed in a blur of medical jargon and the soft beeping of monitoring equipment. I found myself studying his face, trying to understand what it was about him that made every nerve ending in my body feel like it was on high alert. He wasn't just handsome. I'd seen handsome men before. There was something else, something that spoke to a primal part of my brain that recognized predators and power. When we arrived at Massachusetts General, there was already a small army of people waiting for us. Doctors, nurses, and several more men in expensive suits who watched everything with sharp, calculating eyes. They whisked him away to a private room so quickly that I barely had time to process what was happening. I was directed to a much smaller examination room where a tired-looking doctor cleaned and bandaged my cuts, checked me for signs of concussion, and pronounced me remarkably lucky to have escaped serious injury. The whole process took less than an hour, but when I emerged into the hallway, one of the suited men was waiting for me. "Miss Thompson?" he said politely. "Mr. Valentino would like to see you before you leave." Valentino. So that was his name. It suited him somehow, elegant and dangerous in equal measure. "Is he all right?" I asked as we walked down the hospital corridor. "He will be. Thanks to you." The private room was unlike any hospital room I'd ever seen. It was more like a hotel suite, with actual artwork on the walls and furniture that didn't look like it had been designed by committee. Marco Valentino was sitting up in bed, a white bandage across his forehead and his left arm in a sling, but otherwise he looked remarkably composed for someone who had just survived a car crash and explosion. He was also no longer alone. 3 men in suits stood at various points around the room like sentries. And there was an older woman in a crisp white uniform, a private nurse, I realized, adjusting something on one of the medical machines. "Maya," he said when he saw me, and again I felt that strange flutter in my stomach at the way he said my name. "Come here." It wasn't a request. I walked slowly to his bedside, acutely aware of the eyes watching my every movement. Up close, I could see that the bandage on his forehead couldn't quite hide the stitches beneath. And there were bruises on his neck that spoke of how close he'd come to dying in that car. "How are you feeling?" I asked, because it seemed like the polite thing to say. "Like someone tried to kill me," he replied matter-of-factly, and the casual way he said it made my blood freeze. "Which they did." I stared at him, trying to process what he just said. "What do you mean, tried to kill you?" "The crash wasn't an accident, Maya. Someone cut my brake lines and then used a backup car to force me off the road when the first plan didn't work fast enough." His voice was calm, conversational, like he was discussing the weather. "If you hadn't pulled me out of that car, they would have succeeded." The room seemed to tilt around me. "You're saying someone murdered you? And you're just calm about it?" "Not murdered," he corrected. "Tried to murder." "There's a difference." He studied my face, taking in my shock and confusion. "This is new for you." "This is insane," I said, taking a step backward. "I should go. I should call the police." "The police have already been notified," one of the suited men said. His voice was different from Marco's, rougher, with a Boston accent that spoke of streets rather than boardrooms. "They're handling the investigation. And you are?" I asked, turning to face him. "Anthony DeMarco," he said. "I work for Mr. Valentino. Work for him, not work with him." The distinction felt important, though I wasn't sure why. "Maya," Marco said, drawing my attention back to him. "Sit down. I should really go home," I said. "My mom will be worried and I have to work tomorrow." "Sit down," he repeated, and this time there was steel beneath the silk of his voice. I sat. "The people who tried to kill me tonight don't know about you yet," he said. "But they will. They're very thorough and they'll investigate every aspect of what happened. When they do, they'll discover that you were there, that you saved my life. And then they'll come for you." The words hit me like a physical blow. Why would they come for me? "I don't know anything. I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time." "Because you saved me," he said simply. "Because in their world, that makes you my ally. And my allies become their targets." I felt like I was drowning, like the air in the room had suddenly become too thick to breathe. This can't be happening. I'm nobody. I'm just a waitress. I serve people coffee and pasta and try to pay my mother's medical bills. I don't belong in this world. You don't, he agreed. But you're in it now, whether you want to be or not. And that means you need protection. Protection from who? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "The Torino family," Anthony said grimly. Marco's uncle decided that the family business would be better served with Marco's cousin running things instead of Marco. "Family business?" I repeated weakly. Marco's smile was sharp as a blade. "We own several legitimate businesses throughout Boston, Maya. Restaurants, construction companies, waste management. But we also have other interests." The way he said it made everything click into place with horrible clarity. The expensive suits, the casual mention of attempted murder, the small army of men who moved like professional bodyguards. I wasn't just looking at a wealthy businessman who'd been the victim of a random crime. I was looking at a member of the mafia. "Oh God," I whispered. "Now you understand," Marco said. "And now you understand why I can't just let you walk away. You saved my life, Maya Thompson. You put yourself in danger for someone you didn't even know, and that makes you special. It also makes you mine to protect. I'm not yours, I said automatically, though my voice came out weaker than I'd intended. His smile widened, and for the first time since I pulled him from that burning car, he looked truly dangerous. Yes, he said softly. You are. Before I could respond, there was a knock on the door. One of the guards opened it to reveal a young woman in a police uniform. Her face flushed from rushing through the hospital corridors. Mr. Valentino? She said, slightly out of breath. I'm Officer Martinez. I need to ask you some questions about what happened tonight. Marco's expression didn't change, but I noticed the way Anthony stepped slightly forward, positioning himself between the police officer and the bed. Of course, Marco said politely. Though I'm afraid I don't remember much about the actual crash. Head injury, you understand. It was a lie. I could see it in the careful way he spoke and the slight tension around his eyes. He remembered everything, but he wasn't going to tell the police about it. What about you, miss? Officer Martinez asked, turning to me. Did you see what happened? I opened my mouth, then closed it again. What was I supposed to say? That I'd witnessed what was apparently an attempted mob assassination. That the man lying in this hospital bed had just told me I was now a target for murder? I saw the car crash, I said finally. It was raining hard and the roads were slick. The car spun out and hit the barrier, then caught fire. I pulled him out. It wasn't technically a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. Officer Martinez nodded and made some notes on her pad. We'll need formal statements from both of you once Mr. Valentino is feeling better, she said. In the meantime, we're treating this as a single vehicle accident unless the investigation turns up evidence to the contrary. After she left, the room fell silent except for the quiet hum of medical equipment. I stared at my hands, trying to process everything that had happened in the last few hours. This morning, my biggest problem had been figuring out how to make rent. Now I was apparently caught up in some kind of mob war. I know this is overwhelming, Marco said gently, and when I looked up, his expression was softer than it had been. But I want you to understand something, Maya. I meant what I said about protecting you. That's not a threat, it's a promise. What does that mean, exactly? I asked. It means that as long as you're in danger because of me, you'll have the full protection of my family, he said. It means that no one will hurt you while you're under my care. And what do you want in return? Nothing, he said, and he sounded surprised that I'd asked. You saved my life. Honor demands that I protect yours. Honor. The word sat strangely in the air between us, archaic and formal in a way that spoke of old traditions and older rules. I need to think about this, I said finally. I need to go home and process what you've told me. Of course, Marco said. Anthony will drive you home and make sure you get there safely. Tomorrow we'll talk about longer-term arrangements. Longer-term arrangements? You can't go back to your normal life, Maya, he said gently. Not until this is resolved. Your apartment, your job, your daily routines, they're all potential vulnerabilities now. We'll need to make some changes. The word changes sent a spike of panic through me. I can't just disappear from my life. I have responsibilities. My mother is sick, and she depends on me. I have bills to pay and work shifts to cover. Your mother's medical expenses will be taken care of, Marco said, as will any other financial obligations you have. And we'll make sure she has the best care available while you're away. Away? The panic was growing now, making my voice rise. Away where? Somewhere safe, Anthony said from his position by the door. Mr. Valentino has several properties where you can stay until this situation is resolved. No, I said, standing up abruptly. Absolutely not. I'm not going into hiding because of something I had nothing to do with. I'm not going to let my entire life be turned upside down because I did the right thing. Marco studied my face for a long moment, and I got the feeling he was seeing something there that surprised him. You're not what I expected, he said finally. What's that supposed to mean? Most people, when they find themselves in this situation, they either run screaming or they start calculating how to profit from it, he said. You're doing neither, because this is insane, I said. 6 hours ago, I was worried about paying rent. Now you're telling me I need to go into witness protection because I pulled a stranger out of a burning car. This isn't how normal people live. No, he agreed. It's not. But it's how I live, Maya, and now it's how you have to live too. At least for a while. I wanted to argue more, but the exhaustion was finally catching up to me. The adrenaline that had carried me through the rescue and the hospital visit was wearing off, leaving me feeling shaky and overwhelmed. "Can I at least see my mother before you whisk me away to some safe house?" I asked. "Tomorrow," Marco promised. "Anthony will take you home tonight, and tomorrow we'll figure out how to keep both you and your mother safe." The drive home was silent except for the quiet jazz playing on the radio and the sound of rain against the windows. Anthony drove with the casual confidence of someone who had spent a lot of time behind the wheel, navigating Boston's narrow streets like he memorized every turn. My apartment building looked smaller and shabbier than usual when we pulled up in front of it. The contrast between the luxury of Marco's hospital room and my tiny one-bedroom was jarring, a reminder of just how far I'd wandered from my own world tonight. "Miss Thompson," Anthony said as I reached for the door handle. "A word of advice?" I turned to look at him. In the dim light from the street lamp, his face was serious. "Mr. Valentino is a good man," he said. "Better than most in his position. But he's also dangerous, and the world he lives in doesn't forgive weakness. If you're going to be part of that world, even temporarily, you need to understand that the rules are different." "What kind of rules?" I asked. "Loyalty above all else," he said. "Trust, but verify. And never, ever show fear to the wrong person." He paused. "But with Marco, you can be yourself. He doesn't like games, and he doesn't like lies. Be honest with him, and he'll move mountains to protect you." I nodded, though I wasn't sure I fully understood what he was trying to tell me. "Thank you for the ride. There will be someone watching the building tonight," he said as I got out of the car. "You won't see them, but they're there. If anything seems wrong, anything at all, you call this number." He handed me a business card with nothing but a phone number printed on it. Day or night, my apartment felt strange when I let myself in, like I was seeing it through someone else's eyes. The second-hand furniture that I'd been proud to acquire piece by piece now looked tired and worn. The stack of medical bills on my kitchen table seemed to mock me with their red ink and urgent payment notices. I sank onto my couch and tried to process everything that had happened. 24 hours ago, my life had been complicated but predictable. I worked double shifts at the restaurant, scraped together money for Mom's treatments, and fell into bed exhausted every night. It wasn't easy, but it was mine. Now I was apparently under the protection of a man who owned legitimate businesses, but also had other interests, a man whose own family wanted him dead, a man who had looked at me with those amber eyes and told me I belonged to him now. The worst part was the tiny voice in the back of my head that whispered that maybe that wasn't entirely a bad thing. I was still sitting there when my phone rang. The number on the display was one I didn't recognize, but something made me answer it anyway. "Maya?" The voice was deep and familiar, though slightly rough with exhaustion. "Marco?" I said, surprised. "How did you get my number?" "I have resources," he said, and I could hear the slight smile in his voice. "I wanted to make sure you got home safely." "I did." "Your friend Anthony is very efficient." "He is," Marco agreed. "Maya, I know tonight was overwhelming. I know this isn't the life you chose. But I want you to know that I'll do everything in my power to resolve this situation as quickly as possible." "How long do these kinds of things usually take?" I asked. "It depends," he said honestly. "Sometimes days, sometimes months. It depends on how stubborn my uncle decides to be." Months. The word hit me like a physical blow. I couldn't disappear from my life for months. "I can't do this," I said suddenly. "I can't just abandon everything I've worked for. My mother needs me, and I can't afford to miss work." "Maya," Marco said gently. "Look out your window." I frowned, but got up and walked to my living room window, pulling back the curtain to peer down at the street below. At first, I didn't see anything unusual. Then I noticed the black SUV parked across from my building, its windows too dark to see through. "Do you see them?" Marco asked. "Who are they?" "The men I sent to watch over you," he said. "They'll be there all night, and others will take their place in the morning." "But Maya, those aren't the only people who might be watching your building tonight." A chill ran down my spine. "What do you mean?" "I mean that by now my uncle knows exactly who you are and where you live. He knows where you work, where your mother is receiving treatment, what bank you use, and probably what you had for breakfast this morning. The only reason you're safe right now is because he's not sure yet whether you're a threat or just an innocent bystander." I sank back onto my couch, the phone pressed to my ear. "How can I be a threat? I don't know anything about your business. You know I'm alive, Marco said simply. And you know that someone tried to kill me. In my uncle's mind, that makes you a witness who could potentially cause him problems. But I would never, I don't want to get involved in any of this. I know that, Marco said. But he doesn't, and he's not the kind of man who takes chances. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of the situation settling on my shoulders like a lead blanket. So what happens now? Now you get some sleep, Marco said. Tomorrow Anthony will pick you up and bring you to see me. We'll figure out the details then. What if I say no? I asked. What if I just refuse to cooperate with any of this? The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that I started to think he'd hung up. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft but unmistakably serious. Then you'll probably be dead by the end of the week, he said. And so will your mother. The line went dead, leaving me staring at the phone in my hand. Outside, the rain continued to fall, and somewhere in the darkness, men with guns were watching my building. Men who might want to protect me and men who might want to kill me. I looked around my small apartment one more time, taking in the familiar details of my ordinary life. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, I would step into a world of violence and danger and men who spoke of honor and family while planning each other's deaths. But tonight, I was still just Maya Thompson, waitress and daughter, trying to figure out how a simple act of courage had turned my entire world upside down. I barely slept that night. Every sound from the street below made me jump, and I found myself getting up every hour to peer through the curtains at the black SUV that remained parked across from my building like a silent guardian. The men inside were invisible behind the tinted windows, but knowing they were there should have been comforting. Instead, it was terrifying. I kept thinking about what Marco had said, that his uncle probably knew everything about me by now. The idea of strangers picking through my life, investigating my habits and routines, made my skin crawl. I thought about my mother sleeping peacefully in her care facility across town, unaware that her daughter had stumbled into something that could get them both killed. When dawn finally came, I was standing by my kitchen window with a cup of coffee I was too nervous to drink, watching the street come alive with normal people heading to normal jobs. A jogger ran past, earbuds in, focused on her morning routine. A man in a business suit walked briskly toward the tea station, checking his phone. A woman pushed a stroller, cooing at the baby inside. They all looked so blissfully unaware of the danger that had suddenly entered my world. 24 hours ago, I had been one of them. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Anthony will be there in 1 hour. Pack a bag for several days. Essentials only. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "What about work?" "I have a shift at 11. The response came quickly. "Taken care of. Pack your bag. Taken care of." I wondered what that meant. Had someone called in sick for me? Had someone paid my boss to give me time off? Or had someone made the kind of call that restaurant owners didn't argue with? I packed mechanically, throwing clothes and toiletries into the same battered duffel bag I'd used for weekend trips in college. Everything felt surreal, like I was preparing for a vacation I didn't want to take. When I was done, I sat on my bed and called my mother's care facility. "Sunrise Manor, this is Jennifer," the receptionist answered cheerfully. "Hi, this is Maya Thompson. I'm calling to check on my mother, Linda Thompson." "Is she available to talk?" "Oh, Miss Thompson," Jennifer said, and something in her voice made my stomach clench. "I'm so glad you called. We've had some exciting news this morning." "Exciting news?" "An anonymous benefactor has paid off your mother's entire account," Jennifer said, barely containing her enthusiasm. "All outstanding bills plus 6 months in advance. And they've authorized her to be moved to our premium care wing. With private nursing and access to our specialist program, I felt like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. "What do you mean, an anonymous benefactor?" "We don't have details," Jennifer said. "The payment came through early this morning, along with instructions that your mother should receive the very best care we can provide. Isn't that wonderful?" "Can I speak to her?" I asked weakly. "Of course. She's been asking about you all morning. She's very excited about the new room." There was a pause, and then my mother's voice came on the line, stronger and more cheerful than I'd heard her sound in months. "Maya, sweetheart, have you heard? Someone is taking care of everything. All my bills, all my treatments. The doctors say I can start the new therapy program they've been wanting to try. I feel like I've won the lottery." "That's wonderful, Mom," I managed. though my voice sounded strange even to my own ears. Do you have any idea who might have done this? Not a clue, she said happily. The staff thinks it might be some kind of charity foundation that helps families with medical expenses. All I know is that I don't have to worry anymore, and neither do you. We talked for a few more minutes, with Mom going on about her new room and the physical therapist who thought she might be able to regain more mobility than they'd originally hoped. The whole time my mind was spinning. This wasn't charity. This was Marco keeping his promise to take care of my mother's medical expenses. But it was also something else. It was a demonstration of power, a subtle reminder of how easily he could reach into my life and change things with a phone call and a bank transfer. If he could pay off tens of thousands of dollars in medical bills overnight, what else could he do? When I hung up, there was a knock at my door. I looked through the peephole and saw Anthony standing in the hallway, wearing another rumpled suit and a patient expression. "Good morning, Miss Thompson," he said when I opened the door. "Ready to go?" "I guess I have to be," I said, shouldering my duffel bag. "Thank you for taking care of my mother's bills." Anthony's expression didn't change. "I don't know what you mean." "Right?" I said. "Of course you don't." The ride across town was less tense than the previous night, partly because it was daylight and partly because I was too emotionally exhausted to maintain the constant state of panic I'd been in since the crash. Anthony drove through the kind of neighborhoods. I rarely had reason to visit tree-lined streets with historic brownstones and wrought iron gates that spoke of old money and older families. We pulled up in front of a building that looked like it had been designed to intimidate. It was 5 stories of red brick and limestone with narrow windows and architectural details that suggested it had been built sometime in the early 1900s. A brass plaque beside the heavy wooden door read Valentino and Associates, LLC. "His office?" I asked. "One of them," Anthony said. He thought you'd be more comfortable meeting somewhere neutral rather than his home. Lobby was all polished marble and expensive art with the kind of furniture that looked beautiful but uninviting. A receptionist with perfect hair and a tailored suit smiled at us as we approached her desk. "Mr. DeMarco," she said pleasantly. "He's waiting for you in the conference room." We took an elevator to the 3rd floor and walked on a hallway lined with oil paintings that probably cost more than I made in a year. Anthony knocked once on a set of double doors, then opened them without waiting for a response. Marco was sitting at the head of a long conference table, his injured arm still in a sling but otherwise looking remarkably composed for someone who had nearly died less than 24 hours earlier. He was wearing a different suit, charcoal gray with a subtle pinstripe, and his dark hair was perfectly styled despite the bandage that was still visible at his hairline. When he saw me, he stood and smiled, and I was struck again by how devastatingly handsome he was. In the harsh fluorescent lighting of the hospital, he had been attractive in a dangerous way. Here, in his own environment, he was absolutely magnetic. "Maya," he said, moving around the table to greet me. "How are you feeling this morning?" "Confused," I said honestly, "and a little overwhelmed." "Understandable," he said. "Please sit down. Can I get you coffee? Something to eat?" I shook my head and took the chair he indicated, which put me directly across from him when he returned to his seat. Anthony positioned himself by the door, close enough to intervene if necessary, but far enough away to give us the illusion of privacy. "First things first," Marco said, leaning forward slightly. "How is your mother?" "She's fine," I said. "Happy, actually, thanks to her anonymous benefactor." Marco's smile was slight but genuine. "I told you her expenses would be taken care of." "I keep my promises, Maya." "That was a lot of money," I said. "More than I could have paid back in years." "I'm not asking you to pay it back," he said. "I told you, you saved my life. Honor demands that I take care of you and those you care about." There was that word again, honor. It seemed to carry a weight for him that I didn't fully understand. "So what happens now?" I asked. "You said we needed to talk about long-term arrangements." Marco's expression grew serious. "I had my people do some checking overnight. My uncle's family has been asking questions about you, where you work, who you know, what your routines are. They also put a team on surveillance of your building starting around 3 this morning." "A team?" "2 men in a gray sedan," Anthony said from his position by the door. "They relieved the first surveillance team at dawn. Professional quality, but not subtle. I felt a chill run down my spine, so they're definitely planning to." "To hurt me?" "Not immediately," Marco said. Right now, they're gathering intelligence. They want to know everything about you before they decide how to proceed. But Maya, I need you to understand something in their minds. There are only two ways this ends. Either you become an asset they can use, or you become a problem they need to eliminate. An asset? I repeated. What does that mean? Marco's jaw tightened slightly. It means they might try to recruit you. Offer you money to report on my activities, or to get close to me and gather information. And if you refuse ... double quotes, he didn't need to finish the sentence. So what do you suggest? I asked, surprised by how calm my own voice sounded. I suggest you disappear for a while, Marco said. I have a house in the Berkshires, completely secure and off the grid. You can stay there until this situation is resolved. For how long? I don't know, he said honestly. It could be weeks, it could be months. It depends on how this plays out. I stared at him across the conference table, trying to process what he was suggesting. You want me to abandon my entire life indefinitely because I pulled you out of a burning car. I want you to stay alive, he said simply. And what about you? I asked. Are you going into hiding too? No, Marco said. I can't run from this, Maya. This is my family, my business, my responsibility. I have to see it through. So you get to continue living your life while I disappear into witness protection? Something flashed in Marco's eyes, surprise, maybe, or admiration. Most people don't question the arrangements when their lives are in danger. I'm not most people, I said. And I don't like the idea of hiding while you deal with people who want to kill us both. It's not your fight, Marco said. It became my fight the minute I pulled you out of that car, I said. You said it yourself, I'm part of this now whether I want to be or not. So maybe instead of sending me away to hide, you should tell me what's really going on. Marco studied my face for a long moment, and I got the feeling he was weighing something in his mind. Finally, he looked at Anthony. Give us some privacy, he said. Anthony nodded and left the room, closing the doors behind him with a soft click. When we were alone, Marco leaned back in his chair and regarded me with those intense amber eyes. My family has been in Boston for 4 generations, he began. My great-grandfather came over from Sicily in 1920 with nothing but a suitcase and a willingness to work harder than anyone else. He started with a small grocery store in the North End, then expanded into restaurants, then construction. All legitimate? I asked. Mostly, Marco said with a slight smile. But Boston in the 1920s wasn't a place where purely legitimate businesses thrived, especially for Italian immigrants. So my great-grandfather made certain accommodations. He provided services that people needed but couldn't get through official channels. Protection for shop owners who were being harassed. Loans for families who couldn't get credit from banks. Resolution of disputes that the courts wouldn't touch. You mean he was a gangster? I said bluntly. He was a man who understood that sometimes the law and justice aren't the same thing, Marco said. And he passed that understanding down to his son, and his son passed it down to his son, my father. And your father passed it down to you? He tried to, Marco said. But I had different ideas about how the family business should evolve. I wanted to go completely legitimate, to transform what my great-grandfather built into something we could be proud of in the daylight. And your uncle disagreed? My uncle believes that legitimate businesses are for legitimate people, Marco said, and will never be legitimate in the eyes of people like the Brahmins who run the city. So why pretend? Why not embrace what we are and take what we want? I was beginning to understand the scope of the conflict. This wasn't just about business, it was about identity, about what kind of family they wanted to be. So he's trying to kill you because you want to go straight. He's trying to kill me because I'm in his way, Marco said. As long as I'm alive and in control of the family interests, he can't implement his vision. And my vision threatens everything he's worked for. What exactly is his vision? Marco's expression darkened. Expansion into territories we've always avoided. Drugs, human trafficking, protection rackets that target ordinary families instead of other criminals. He wants to be the kind of family that people fear instead of respect. The distinction seemed important to him, though I wasn't sure I understood the difference. And if he succeeds in killing you? Then my cousin takes over and my uncle runs things from behind the scenes, Marco said. And Boston becomes a much more dangerous place for everyone who isn't under their protection. I thought about this for a moment, trying to understand the larger implications. So by saving your life, I didn't just get involved in a family dispute. I potentially prevented a hostile takeover of organized crime in Boston. That's one way to put it, Marco said. And now your uncle sees me as a threat because I might be able to testify about the attempt on your life, which could expose his involvement and ruin his plans. Exactly. I leaned back in my chair, feeling overwhelmed again. This is so much bigger than I thought. It is, Marco agreed. Which is why I want you somewhere safe while I handle it. But what if you can't handle it? I asked. What if he wins? Then you'll be glad you were somewhere he couldn't find you. I looked at him across the table, taking in the expensive suit, the confident posture, the way he spoke about life and death matters like they were business decisions to be analyzed and managed. But I also saw the bandage on his forehead, the sling supporting his injured arm, the faint bruises on his neck that reminded me how vulnerable he looked when I pulled him from that burning car. I have a counter-proposal, I said suddenly. Marco raised an eyebrow. I'm listening. Instead of hiding me away where I can't help or contribute, keep me close. Your uncle wants to know about me? Let him find out that I'm not going anywhere. That I'm not afraid of him. Absolutely not, Marco said immediately. Why not? Because you could be killed. I could be killed anyway, I pointed out. You said yourself that there are only two ways this ends for me. I become an asset or I become a problem. Well, what if there's a third option? What if I become a partner? Marco stared at me like I'd suggested we rob a bank together. Maya, you don't understand what you're asking. This isn't a movie. The danger is real and the people we're dealing with don't hesitate to hurt innocent people. I understand that, I said. But I also understand that running away and hiding isn't really living. And I've been barely living for a long time now, working multiple jobs just to keep my head above water, watching my mother get sicker while I count pennies to pay for her care. You've already changed my life, Marco. You've given my mother the treatment she needs. And you've shown me that there are people in this world who have real power. Power comes with a price, Marco said quietly. Everything comes with a price, I said. The question is whether the price is worth paying. Marco was quiet for a long moment, studying my face like he was trying to solve a puzzle. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft. You're not what I expected, he said again. What did you expect? Someone who would take the money and run, he said. Someone who would be grateful for the protection and not ask questions about the cost. Sorry to disappoint you. You didn't disappoint me, Marco said. You surprised me. And that's been a rare experience lately. There was something in his tone that made me look at him more closely. Despite the expensive clothes and the confident demeanor, there was a loneliness in his eyes that I recognized. It was the same loneliness I'd been carrying around since my father died. The feeling of being responsible for more than you could handle and having no one who really understood what that was like. If I stay, I said carefully, what would that look like? It would mean moving into a secure location where I could ensure your safety, Marco said. It would mean accepting protection from my people and following security protocols that might seem restrictive. It would mean becoming part of a world that operates by different rules than the one you're used to. And in exchange? In exchange, you'd have the resources to build whatever kind of life you want, he said. You never have to worry about money again or about your mother's care, or about whether you can afford to take time off when you're sick. You'd have access to opportunities that most people can only dream of. It sounded too good to be true, which meant it probably was. What's the catch? I asked. Marco smiled, and for the first time since I'd met him, it was a completely genuine expression. The catch is that once you're in, you can never really get out. The people in my world, we take care of our own, but we also expect loyalty. Absolute loyalty. And if someone betrays that loyalty, then they become a problem that needs to be solved, Marco said simply. The words should have terrified me, but instead, they felt like a challenge. I thought about my life up to this point, the constant stress, the endless worry about money, the feeling that I was always one crisis away from losing everything I'd worked for. I thought about my mother's face that morning when she told me about her anonymous benefactor, how happy she'd sounded for the first time in months. And I thought about the way Marco looked at me like I was something valuable and rare, something worth protecting. I need some time to think about it, I said finally. Of course, Marco said. But Maya, you don't have unlimited time. Every hour you spend in your regular routine is an hour my uncle's people have to plan their next move. How long do I have? Today, Marco said. Tonight at the latest. After that, the decision may be taken out of both our hands. As if summoned by our conversation about time running out, Anthony appeared in the doorway. "Boss," he said urgently. "We have a problem." Marco's entire demeanor changed instantly, becoming focused and dangerous. "What kind of problem?" "The surveillance team on Miss Thompson's building, they're gone. Replaced by a cleanup crew." "Cleanup crew?" I asked, looking between them. Marco's face had gone pale beneath his tan. "It means they've moved from surveillance to action," he said grimly. "Anthony, how long ago?" 20 minutes, Anthony said, and there's more. We picked up radio chatter suggesting they're planning to move on the restaurant where she works. They think she might show up for her shift. The blood drained from my face. "My coworkers," I whispered. "If they're watching the restaurant and I don't show up, they might hurt the other people there." "They won't hurt innocent people," Marco said, but he didn't sound entirely certain. "You don't know that," I said, standing up abruptly. "I have to warn them." "No," Marco said firmly. "You can't go anywhere near that restaurant. It's exactly what they're expecting you to do. So what do you suggest?" "That I just let my friends walk into danger because I'm too scared to." "Anthony," Marco interrupted, "get a team to the restaurant. Full protection for everyone on shift. And I want surveillance on every approach." "Already done," Anthony said. "Team deployed 15 minutes ago." I stared at him. "You were already protecting them?" "Mr. Valentino doesn't take chances with innocent people," Anthony said. "Your coworkers are safe." The relief I felt was so intense that I had to sit back down. Marco was watching me carefully, and I realized that this had been another test. He'd wanted to see if I would put other people's safety before my own. "The offer to disappear is still on the table," Marco said quietly. "And it's still the safest option." I looked at him across the conference table, this man who had somehow managed to anticipate and protect people I cared about before I'd even thought to worry about them. This man who spoke of honor and loyalty like they were currencies more valuable than money. This man whose family wanted him dead and who was offering to share the danger with a woman he'd known for less than a day. "I told you I needed time to think about it," I said. "I've thought about it." "And?" "I'm in," I said. "Whatever this is, whatever it costs, I'm in." Marco's smile was slow and dangerous and absolutely devastating. "Welcome to the family, Maya Thompson." The next few hours passed in a whirlwind of activity that left me feeling like I'd stepped onto a stage in the middle of a play I didn't know I was auditioning for. Marco made a series of phone calls in rapid Italian while Anthony coordinated with various teams of people whose job descriptions I could only guess at. Within an hour, my few belongings had been collected from my apartment by a crew of movers who worked with military efficiency. My mother had been transferred to what Marco described as a more secure facility that turned out to be a private medical center in the suburbs with enough security to protect a head of state. "She thinks she won a second lottery," I said, watching from the window of Marco's office as yet another black SUV pulled up to the building below. "She has," Marco said from behind his desk, where he was reviewing what looked like building plans. "She has you." The comment made something warm uncurl in my chest, though I tried not to let it show on my face. The last thing I needed was to develop feelings for a man whose idea of conflict resolution probably involved activities that were highly illegal. But there was something about the way he'd handled everything: the protection for my coworkers, the care arrangements for my mother, the respect with which he treated my decisions even when he disagreed with them, that suggested there might be more to Marco Valentino than just expensive suits and dangerous connections. "Where exactly am I going to be staying?" I asked, turning away from the window. "My house," Marco said without looking up from his papers. "It's the most secure location I have, and it allows me to guarantee your safety personally." "Your house," I repeated. "As in, where you live?" "Yes. Isn't that going to send a certain message to your uncle about my role in all this?" Marco finally looked up, and there was something unreadable in his expression. "What message do you think it will send?" "That I'm more than just a witness you're protecting," I said carefully. "That I'm someone important to you." "And would that be a problem?" The question hung in the air between us, loaded with implications I wasn't sure I was ready to explore. On one hand, the idea of being important to someone like Marco was intoxicating in a way I didn't want to examine too closely. On the other hand, I'd just agreed to enter a world where perception could be the difference between life and death. I just want to make sure we're both clear about what this is, I said finally. What do you think this is? I think this is a man with a strong sense of honor protecting someone who saved his life, I said. I think this is a business arrangement with some very high stakes. Marco studied my face for a moment, then nodded slowly. You're right, he said. That's exactly what this is. But something in his tone suggested that might not be all it was, and the way he looked at me made my stomach flutter with a mixture of anticipation and nervousness. Anthony appeared in the doorway again, and I was starting to think the man never actually left the building. Cars ready, he said. Teams in position at the house, and we have clean routes mapped out. Good, Marco said, standing and reaching for his jacket with his uninjured arm. Maya, are you ready? I looked around the office one more time, taking in the expensive furniture and the oil paintings and the view of Boston that spoke of power and influence. 24 hours ago, I had been serving coffee to people like Marco. Now I was about to move into his house under his protection. As ready as I'll ever be, I said. The ride to Marco's house took us through parts of Boston I'd never seen, past historic neighborhoods where the houses were set back from the street behind tall gates and mature trees. We drove in a convoy of 3 cars with our vehicle in the middle and identical black SUVs in front and behind. Is all the security really necessary? I asked, watching pedestrians and other drivers through the tinted windows. It is until we know what my uncle is planning, Marco said. He was sitting beside me in the back seat, close enough that I could smell his cologne and feel the warmth radiating from his body. After that, we can reassess. What do you think he's planning? Honestly? I think he's going to try to use you against me, Marco said. He knows that I feel responsible for your safety. If he can get his hands on you, he has leverage. And if he can't, then he'll probably try to kill us both at the same time. The casual way he said it made me realize how completely my life had changed. Yesterday, the biggest danger I faced was the possibility of getting mugged walking home late from work. Now I was discussing assassination attempts like they were weather forecast. Does it ever get easier? I asked. Living with this kind of uncertainty? Marco looked at me with what might have been surprise. You're asking me if I get used to people trying to kill me? I'm asking if you get used to never feeling completely safe. No, he said after a moment. You don't get used to it. You just get better at managing it. That's not very reassuring. I didn't realize you were looking for reassurance, Marco said with a slight smile. I thought you were looking for honesty. I am, I said. But a little reassurance wouldn't hurt. Then let me reassure you about this, Marco said, his voice becoming serious. As long as you're with me, you're under my protection. And I've never lost anyone who was under my protection. Never? Never. There was something absolute in the way he said it that made me believe him. Whatever else Marco Valentino might be, he was clearly someone who took his promises seriously. The house, when we finally reached it, was not what I'd been expecting. Instead of the ostentatious mansion I'd pictured, it was a graceful colonial that managed to look both elegant and understated. It was set back from the road behind a discreet wall with mature landscaping that provided privacy without looking fortress-like. It's beautiful, I said as we pulled up the circular driveway. It was my grandmother's, Marco said. She left it to me when she died, along with very specific instructions about not turning it into something vulgar. She sounds like she had strong opinions. She did, Marco said with obvious affection. She also had excellent taste and the will to enforce it. The front door opened as we approached, revealing an older woman in a crisp black dress who could have been typecast as the perfect housekeeper in a period movie. She was probably in her 60s, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and intelligent dark eyes that missed nothing. Maya, Marco said, I'd like you to meet Sophia Benedetti. She's been taking care of this house and me for longer than I care to admit. 23 years, Sophia said with a slight Italian accent, looking me over with frank curiosity. And you must be the young woman who pulled this stubborn man from a burning car. I am, I said, offering my hand. Maya Thompson. Instead of shaking my hand, Sophia pulled me into a brief but warm embrace. Benna, she said approvingly. You have strong hands. Good. This one needs someone who won't let him get away with his nonsense. Sophia, Marco said warningly. What? She said innocently. I'm just welcoming our guest. The inside of the house was as elegant as the exterior. with rich wood paneling and antique furniture that somehow managed to feel comfortable rather than museum-like. Sophia led us through rooms filled with art and books and family photographs that spoke of generations of history. "I've put Miss Thompson in the blue suite," Sophia told Marco as we climbed a graceful staircase. "It has the best view of the garden, and it's close enough to your room that she feels secure but far enough away that people won't talk." "People will talk anyway," Marco said dryly. "Then they'll have something worth talking about," Sophia replied with a meaningful look that made me blush. My room turned out to be a beautiful suite with French doors that opened onto a balcony overlooking formal gardens. The furniture was antique but comfortable, and there were fresh flowers on the dresser and what looked like a collection of books chosen specifically for my interests. "How did you know I like mysteries?" I asked, noticing the titles on the nightstand. "I made some educated guesses," Marco said. "If I was wrong, Sophia can find you something else." "They're perfect," I said, touched by the thoughtfulness. "Dinner is at 7, Sophia announced. "I'll send someone up to help you settle in." When we were alone, Marco seemed suddenly uncertain, as if he wasn't sure what the protocol was for this situation. "I know this is strange," he said finally. "Having your life turned upside down, moving into a stranger's house. You're not exactly a stranger anymore," I said. "Besides, you're right that I needed somewhere safe to stay while this gets sorted out." "Still," Marco said, "if you need anything or if you want to change your mind about any of this double quotes, I won't change my mind," I said. "But thank you for giving me the option." Marco studied my face for a moment, and I got the feeling he was still trying to figure out what to make of me. "I'll see you at dinner," he said finally. After he left, I stood on the balcony and looked out at the gardens, trying to process the surreal turn my life had taken. 48 hours ago, my biggest concern had been whether I could afford to fix my car's transmission. Now I was living in a house that probably cost more than I'd earned in my entire lifetime, under the protection of a man whose family wanted him dead. The strangest part was that I didn't feel like I was in over my head. Scared, yes. Uncertain about the future, absolutely. But not overwhelmed. If anything, I felt more alive than I had in years. There was a soft knock at the door, and Sophia entered carrying a tea service on an elegant silver tray. "I thought you might like some refreshments," she said, setting the tray on a small table near the windows. "And perhaps some conversation." "That would be nice," I said, settling into one of the chairs. Sophia poured tea with practiced grace and handed me a delicate porcelain cup that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. "So," she said, settling into the opposite chair with her own cup, "you saved his life. Anyone would have done the same thing," I said automatically. "No," Sophia said firmly. "They would not. Most people would have called for help and waited. Most people would not have risked their own lives for a stranger. I couldn't just watch someone die. And that," Sophia said with satisfaction, "is why he trusts you." "He barely knows me," I protested. "He knows enough," Sophia said. "Marco has very good instincts about people. He has to in his position. And his instincts about you are very strong." "What do you mean?" Sophia studied me over her teacup. "He has not brought a woman to this house in more than 5 years," she said carefully. "And never one he intended to protect rather than simply entertain." The implication made my cheeks warm. "This is just about keeping me safe until the situation with his uncle is resolved. If you say so," Sophia said with a smile that suggested she knew better. "But Maya, may I call you Maya? I want you to understand something about Marco. He's a good man, but he is not a simple man. The world he lives in requires him to make choices that most people cannot understand. Sometimes those choices come with a price." "What kind of price?" "The price of knowing that the people you care about may always be in danger because of who you are," Sophia said quietly. "The price of never being able to live a completely normal life. The price of carrying responsibilities that can sometimes feel overwhelming." I thought about what she was saying, about the loneliness I glimpsed in Marco's eyes and the way he seemed to carry on his shoulders. "You're warning me," I said. "I'm preparing you," Sophia corrected. "Because I hope that you're going to become very important to him. And if you do, you should understand what that means." "And what does it mean?" "It means you'll never have to worry about money or safety or security again," Sophia said. "It means you'll have access to a world of privilege and opportunity that most people can only dream of." But it also means you'll be part of something larger than yourself, something that comes with obligations and expectations. You make it sound like I'm signing a contract, aren't you? Sophia asked with a slight smile. In a way? Before I could answer, there was another knock at the door. This time it was Anthony, looking unusually urgent. Miss Thompson, he said. Mr. Valentino needs to see you downstairs. Immediately. The tone of his voice made my stomach drop. What's wrong? We'll brief you downstairs, Anthony said. Please. I followed Anthony down to what turned out to be Marco's study, a room lined with books and dominated by a massive desk that looked like it had been there for decades. Marco was standing behind the desk with a phone pressed to his ear, speaking in rapid Italian that sounded increasingly tense. When he saw me, he ended the call and set the phone down with more force than necessary. What's happened? I asked. My uncle made his move, Marco said grimly. He's taken 3 of my legitimate business locations hostage. Restaurants, all of them, all with customers and staff inside. The blood drained from my face. He's holding innocent people hostage. He's sending me a message, Marco said. The message is that he's willing to hurt innocent people to get what he wants. And what he wants is you? Me? He's demanding a trade, Anthony explained. You in exchange for the safe release of everyone in those restaurants. I felt like the room was spinning. How many people? Estimated 60 to 70, Marco said. Families with children, elderly couples, young people out for dinner. The weight of that number hit me like a physical blow. 70 innocent people in danger because I pulled a stranger from a burning car. Then we make the trade, I said immediately. Absolutely not, Marco said. Marco, there are 70 people whose lives will not be saved by sacrificing yours, Marco interrupted. If I give you to my uncle, he'll kill you and then kill the hostages anyway to tie up loose ends. You don't know that. I know him, Marco said grimly. This isn't a negotiation, it's a trap. So what do? We get those people out, Marco said, without giving him what he wants. How? Marco looked at Anthony and some kind of communication passed between them. We're going to end this, Marco said. Tonight. What does that mean? It means the waiting is over, Marco said. It means my uncle has crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. And it means that by tomorrow morning, either he'll be dead or I will be. The words hit me like ice water. You're going to kill him? If necessary, Marco said simply. But first, we're going to save those hostages. All of them. How can I help? You can stay here where you're safe, Marco said immediately. That's not helping, I protested. That's hiding while other people risk their lives to clean up a mess that exists because of me. Maya, Marco said, moving around the desk to face me directly. This is not your fault. This is the culmination of a conflict that's been building for years. You didn't create this situation. That I'm the excuse he's using to hurt innocent people right now. And you're also the person I need to keep safe, Marco said. If something happens to you, then everyone who's risking their lives tonight will have done it for nothing. I looked at him, taking in the intensity in his amber eyes, the set of his jaw that spoke of a decision already made. He was going to walk into what sounded like a war zone because his uncle had threatened innocent people. And he was going to do it while worrying about my safety. Promise me something? I said suddenly. What? Promise me you'll come back. Marco's expression softened slightly. I promise you I'll do everything in my power to come back. That's not the same thing. No, he agreed. It's not. But it's the only promise I can make. I wanted to argue more, to insist that there had to be another way, but I could see in his face that this was bigger than just tonight. This was about the kind of man he was, the kind of leader his people needed him to be. When do you leave? I asked instead. 1 hour, Marco said. Anthony will coordinate security here while I'm gone. And if something goes wrong? Then Anthony has instructions to get you somewhere safe and keep you there until the situation stabilizes. I nodded, trying not to think about all the ways this plan could go catastrophically wrong. Is there anything I can do to help with the actual operation? Pray, Marco said with a slight smile that didn't reach his eyes. The hour passed with agonizing slowness. Marco disappeared into a series of phone calls and strategy sessions while I paced around the study, trying not to imagine all the worst-case scenarios. Anthony came and went with updates and equipment, transforming the elegant house into what felt like a military command center. When Marco finally reappeared, he was wearing black tactical gear instead of his expensive suit, and he looked like someone who was very comfortable with violence. It was jarring to see the transformation from elegant businessman to dangerous predator. "Remember what I told you about staying put," he said, checking what looked like a very professional firearm with practiced ease. "I remember," I said. "But Marco, yeah? Be careful. I know you're good at what you do, but these people want you dead. Don't take any unnecessary risks." Something shifted in his expression, becoming softer and more vulnerable. "You sound like you actually care about what happens to me." "I do care," I said, surprised by how true that was. "Is that a problem?" "No," Marco said quietly. "It's not a problem." He moved closer then until he was standing directly in front of me. This close, I could see the flecks of gold in his amber eyes, could smell the scent of soap and something purely masculine that made my heart race. "Maya," he said, reaching up to touch my face with his uninjured hand. When this is over, we'll figure it out," I finished for him, because I could see that he was struggling with something he wanted to say. "Yeah," he said, his thumb brushing across my cheekbone. "We will." For a moment, I thought he was going to kiss me. For a moment, I wanted him to. But then Anthony was calling his name, and the moment was broken. "I have to go," Marco said, stepping back. "I know. Stay safe. You too." I watched from the study window as Marco and his team loaded into several vehicles and disappeared into the night. When the last set of taillights vanished, I was left alone in the big house with Sophia and a handful of security personnel whose job was to make sure I didn't do anything stupid. The waiting was the worst part. I tried reading, tried watching television, tried helping Sophia in the kitchen, but nothing could distract me from the knowledge that somewhere across the city, Marco was walking into a situation that could get him killed. At midnight, Anthony called with the first update. "First location secured," he reported. 18 hostages safe, no casualties. 2 more locations to go. At 1:30, he called again. "Second location secured. 23 hostages safe. 2 injuries, both non-life-threatening. 1 more location." At 2:45, my phone rang with an unknown number. "Maya?" Marco's voice was rough with exhaustion, but he was alive. "Are you okay?" I asked immediately. "I'm fine. All hostages are safe. It's over." The relief was so intense I had to sit down. "What about your uncle?" "Dead," Marco said simply. "Along with most of his lieutenants. The few who survived are in custody." "And your cousin?" "Decided he preferred living to fighting," Marco said with what sounded like grim satisfaction. "He's renounced any claim to family leadership and agreed to relocate to another city." I wasn't sure how I felt about the fact that people were dead because of a conflict I'd been dragged into, but I was grateful that Marco wasn't one of them. "When are you coming home?" I asked, then blushed at my choice of words. "Home," Marco repeated, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "You know what I mean? I'll be there in an hour," he said. "Get some sleep, Maya. We have a lot to talk about tomorrow." But I couldn't sleep. I spent the next hour pacing around my room, processing everything that had happened and trying to figure out what came next. The immediate threat was over, which meant I no longer needed Marco's protection. I could go back to my normal life, my normal job, my normal problems. The thought should have been comforting. Instead, it felt like losing something I'd only just found. I was standing on the balcony, looking out at the gardens in the moonlight, when I heard a car pull up the driveway. A few minutes later, there was a soft knock on my door. "Come in," I called. Marco entered, still wearing the tactical gear, but looking less dangerous than he had when he'd left. There was a cut on his cheek and what looked like the beginning of a bruise on his jaw, but otherwise he appeared unharmed. "You're really okay?" I asked, studying his face. "I'm really okay," he confirmed. "How are you?" "I know tonight was difficult. I'm glad it's over," I said honestly. "I'm glad everyone is safe, including me." "Especially you." Marco smiled at that, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him all day. "Good to know." We stood there for a moment, looking at each other across the elegant room. The immediate crisis was over, but there was still so much unresolved between us. "So what happens now?" I asked finally. "Now you get to decide," Marco said. "The threat is over, which means you're free to go back to your life if that's what you want. I'll make sure you have everything you need in a new apartment if you don't feel safe in the old one. Money to cover any expenses, protection if you ever need it. And if I don't want to go back? Then you stay, Marco said simply. You become part of this world, part of my world on whatever terms you're comfortable with. What would that look like? Marco was quiet for a moment as if he was choosing his words carefully. It would look like whatever we want it to look like, he said finally. We could start with dinner and see where it goes from there. The simplicity of the suggestion made me smile. Just dinner? Just dinner, Marco confirmed. Though I should probably warn you that once I start courting you properly, I can be pretty persistent. Courting me? I repeated, amused by the old-fashioned term. I'm traditional in some ways, Marco said with a slight shrug. My grandmother would have my head if I didn't treat you with the respect you deserve. And how much respect do I deserve? All of it, Marco said seriously. You saved my life, Maya. You risked your own safety for a stranger, and then you chose to stay and face the consequences rather than run away. You're brave and kind and stronger than you know. Any man would be honored to have your attention. Any man? I asked teasingly. Well, Marco said, his smile turning slightly predatory. I'm hoping you'll be selective about who gets it. The implication made something warm and liquid pool in my stomach. I might be persuaded to be very selective. Good, Marco said, moving closer, because I have a confession to make. What's that? I've been thinking about kissing you since the moment you pulled me out of that car, he said. And now that you're safe and this is over, I'd very much like to do something about that. My heart started beating faster. What's stopping you? Making sure you want me to, Marco said. Making sure you understand what it means. What does it mean? It means you're mine, Marco said softly, and I'm yours. It means we're going to build something together, something real and lasting and strong enough to survive whatever comes next. The intensity in his voice made my breath catch. That's a lot to promise based on one kiss. Then I guess I'd better make it count, Marco said, reaching up to cup my face in his hands. When his lips touched mine, it was like coming home and setting off on an adventure at the same time. The kiss was gentle at first, almost tentative, as if he was giving me time to change my mind. But when I kissed him back, threading my fingers through his dark hair, he pulled me closer and deepened the kiss until I was dizzy with want. When we finally broke apart, both of us were breathing hard. So, Marco said, resting his forehead against mine. Dinner tomorrow night? Dinner tomorrow night, I agreed. And after that? After that, we figure it out as we go. Marco smiled, the kind of smile that transformed his entire face and made him look younger and less burdened by the weight of responsibility. I think I can live with that, he said. As I watched him leave my room, I realized that my life had indeed been completely transformed by pulling a stranger from a burning car. But maybe, just maybe, it had been transformed into something even better than what I'd lost. 3 months later, I was standing in the kitchen of Marco's Our House, making coffee and watching the morning news when a story came on that made me stop and pay attention. The completion of the Valentino Community Center in South Boston marks a major milestone in the revitalization of the Bay neighborhood, the reporter was saying over footage of a ribbon-cutting ceremony. The center will provide after-school programs, job training, and medical services to families in the area, all funded by the Valentino Foundation. I smiled as I watched Marco speaking to the reporters, looking every inch the successful businessman and philanthropist. The transformation of the family business from its shadier past into something that genuinely served the community had been his passion project for months. He looks good on television, Sophia said, entering the kitchen and noting what I was watching. He looks good, period, I said, not bothering to hide my admiration. See, Sophia agreed with a knowing smile. And you look good together. She was right about that. The past 3 months had been a period of adjustment and discovery, figuring out how to blend my old life with my new one, learning the unwritten rules of Marco's world while maintaining my own sense of identity. It hadn't always been easy. There were times when the weight of being involved with someone whose business dealings required security precautions felt overwhelming. There were times when I missed the simple anonymity of my old life. But there were also moments like last week, when Marco had surprised me with a visit to my mother at her new care facility, bringing flowers and spending an hour listening to her stories about my childhood. There were evenings spent talking about everything and nothing while walking through the formal gardens. There were mornings when I woke up next to him and felt like the luckiest woman in the world. He should be home soon, Sophia said, starting to prepare ingredients for what I knew would be an elaborate dinner. The center opening was the last event of the day. Good, I said. I have some news for him. Oh. Sophia's eyes lit up with curiosity. What kind of news? Before I could answer, I heard the front door open and Marco's voice calling my name. In the kitchen. I called back. He appeared in the doorway still wearing his formal suit from the ceremony, but his tie was loosened and his hair was slightly mussed from what had probably been a long day of handshaking and photographs. How did it go? I asked, going to him for a kiss that was becoming as natural as breathing. Better than expected, Marco said, pulling me close. The mayor showed up, which was a nice surprise. And we had 3 families sign up for the job training program before the ceremony even ended. That's wonderful, I said, meaning it. Watching Marco channel his protective instincts and organizational skills into something that helped people rather than hurt them had been one of the most attractive things about him. What about your day? Marco asked, settling at the kitchen table while Sophia bustled around us with obvious approval. How was the doctor's appointment? I'd been to see a specialist about some lingering soreness from the night I'd pulled in from the car, nothing serious. But Marco had insisted I get checked out by the best orthopedist in Boston. Interesting, I said, sitting down across from him. She said everything looked good and that there shouldn't be any long-term effects from the rescue. Good, Marco said. I'd hate for you to have permanent damage from saving my life. Actually, I said, reaching across the table to take his hand. She said something else too. What? She said I should avoid any strenuous physical activity for the next few months. Marco frowned. Why? Is there something wrong? Not wrong exactly, I said, unable to keep the smile off my face any longer. Just ... different. Understanding dawned in Marco's eyes, followed quickly by amazement and something that looked like wonder. Maya, he said carefully, are you telling me what I think you're telling me? I'm telling you that in about 7 months, you're going to be a father. The silence that followed was so complete that I could hear the clock ticking on the kitchen wall. Then Marco was out of his chair and pulling me into his arms, spinning me around while Sophia clapped her hands together and exclaimed in rapid Italian, Are you happy? I asked when he finally set me down, suddenly uncertain. We'd never talked about children, had never discussed what our future might look like in concrete terms. Happy? Marco said, cupping my face in his hands. Maya, I'm terrified and thrilled and completely overwhelmed, and I've never been happier about anything in my entire life. Really? Really, he said, kissing me again. I love you. And I love the idea of building a family with you. I love you too, I said, the words coming easily even though it was the first time either of us had said them out loud. Good, Marco said. Because you're stuck with me now. Is that a threat or a promise? I asked teasingly. Both, Marco said with a grin that was pure predator. Definitely both. As I looked around the kitchen at Sophia beaming at us from her position at the stove, at Marco's face shining with joy and possibility, at the life we were building together in this house that was becoming a home, I couldn't help but think about that rainy night 3 months ago when I'd made a split-second decision to stop and help a stranger. It had been the most dangerous thing I'd ever done. It had also been the best. Sometimes the biggest risks lead to the greatest rewards. Sometimes pulling someone out of a burning car changes both of your lives in ways you never could have imagined. And sometimes when you save someone, they end up saving you right back. 6 months later, I was standing in the same garden where Marco had kissed me for the first time, wearing a dress that accommodated my growing belly and watching my new husband work the crowd at our wedding reception. The guest list was an interesting mix of Marco's business associates, my friends from my old life, various family members, and a surprising number of people from the community center who had insisted on coming to celebrate with us. My mother was holding court near the dessert table, looking better than she had in years and regaling anyone who would listen with stories about her daughter who had married into one of Boston's most respected families. The irony of that description wasn't lost on me, but I'd learned that perspective was everything in Marco's world. Regrets? Anthony asked, appearing beside me with 2 glasses of sparkling cider. About what? I asked, accepting the drink gratefully. About pulling him out of that car, Anthony said with a slight smile. About changing your entire life for someone you'd known for 5 minutes. I looked across the garden to where Marco was deep in conversation with the mayor and what appeared to be several other local politicians. He caught my eye and winked, and the simple gesture made my heart flutter the way it had that first night in the hospital. No regrets, I said firmly. Well, maybe one. What's that? I wish I'd worn better shoes that night, I said, looking down at my feet. If I'd known I was going to meet my future husband, I would have put a little more effort into my appearance. Anthony laughed. Somehow, I don't think he cared what you looked like. You were pulling him out of a burning car. True, I agreed. Though I do think the expensive shoes he buys me now are much more comfortable than my old waitressing sneakers. The wages of heroism, Anthony said dryly. Something like that. Marco appeared at my side then, sliding his arm around my waist and pressing a kiss to my temple. What are you two talking about? He asked. Your wife was just telling me she has no regrets about saving your life, Anthony said. Good, Marco said, his hand moving to rest possessively on my rounded belly. Because I have some very specific plans for our future that require her continued cooperation. Plans? I asked. Well, Marco said, his eyes twinkling with mischief. I was thinking we should probably have at least 3 or 4 kids. This house has a lot of bedrooms that need filling. 3 or 4, I repeated. That's a lot of college tuitions. I think we can manage, Marco said dryly. Besides, with our genetics, they're going to be brilliant and beautiful. And probably very good at getting themselves into trouble. Wonder where they get that from, I said, thinking about the way my husband had a talent for finding danger and the way I'd apparently inherited a compulsion to run toward burning cars instead of away from them. No idea, Marco said innocently. We're both very sensible, responsible people, Anthony snorted. Right, the mob boss and the woman who pulls strangers out of burning cars. Very sensible. Former mob boss, Marco corrected. Current philanthropist and community leader. With excellent security measures, I added. And a really good legal team. See? Marco said, pulling me closer. Completely respectable. As the evening wound down and our guests began to leave, I found myself thinking about how much had changed since that rainy night when I'd been driving home from my waitressing job. I was a different person now, more confident, more aware of my own strength, more willing to take risks when the potential reward was worth it. But in some ways, I was exactly the same person who had stopped to help a stranger. I still believed in doing the right thing, even when it was difficult. I still put the people I cared about before my own comfort or safety. I still believed that sometimes you had to take chances on people, even when you didn't know how the story would end. The difference was that now I had someone who not only appreciated those qualities, but shared them. Someone who understood that love and loyalty weren't just words, but actions you took every day. Someone who would always have my back the way I'd had his that night when his car was on fire. Ready to go inside, Mrs. Valentino? Marco asked, using my new name with obvious pleasure. Ready, I said, taking his offered arm. As we walked toward the house, I caught sight of our reflection in one of the French doors, Marco tall and handsome in his tuxedo, me glowing with pregnancy and happiness in my wedding dress, both of us looking like we belonged together. I thought about the last thing Marco had said to me before I'd pulled him from that burning car. You just became my responsibility. At the time, it had sounded ominous, like a threat or a burden. Now I understood what he'd really meant. In his world, being someone's responsibility wasn't about obligation, it was about devotion. It was about saying that person's well-being mattered more than your own comfort, your own safety, your own life. It was about love, even if we hadn't been ready to call it that yet, Marco? I said as we reached the front door. Yeah? I'm glad I pulled you out of that car. Yeah? Marco said, stopping to look at me in the porch light. Why's that? Because you were right, I said. I did become your responsibility that night. But what you didn't mention is that you became mine too. Marco's smile was slow and warm and full of promise. Best responsibility I ever had, he said. Same here, I agreed. And as we walked into our home together, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever burning cars or family conflicts or ordinary everyday problems we might face, we'd face them together. We'd take care of each other the way we'd been doing since that first night, when a simple act of courage had changed both of our lives forever. Sometimes you save someone and they save you right back. Sometimes pulling a stranger out of a burning car is just the beginning of the story, not the end. And sometimes when someone tells you that you've just become their responsibility, what they're really saying is that you've just become their everything.